Another nightmare, she whispered, clutching her head. I thought I'd grown used to them, but they never truly fade. Her chest tightened as the remnants of the dream lingered, dark, suffocating, and unshakable. As sunlight filtered through her window, she let out a weary sigh. Morning already, she murmured, forcing herself out of bed. Walking down the corridor, she glanced at her reflection in the window pane. Her tired eyes met her own gaze, and she whispered to herself, No one can ever know. No one would believe me anyway. A princess pretending to be a maid? It's unheard of. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet hall. We're out of firewood, and eggs, and potatoes, she noted absently. I can't forget to restock those later. She paused for a moment, spinning slowly in the empty corridor. I can't complain. This is the life I chose, a life of freedom, away from the suffocating chains of royalty. But her thoughts turned heavier as she reached the gate. Even though I wanted to change the future, I couldn't. No matter how much I try, it's as though fate mocks my efforts. The gatekeeper greeted her with a wary glance. Princess Vivian, are you well? He asked. She smiled faintly. I'm fine. I absolutely must come back to give my greetings, even if I am the princess. He hesitated, then narrowed his eyes. Did you take anything from the palace this time? Vivian shook her head. No, of course not. But as she stepped past the gates, her thoughts swirled. Once I cross this threshold, I'm no longer Princess Vivian. I am simply Vivian Hesse. Her memories drifted to the day she entered the palace as a 12-year-old, earning the title of princess. Yet, despite the passing years, the title never felt like hers. Being the 16th princess means being invisible, she reflected. I have no power, no influence. Even the servants abandoned me one by one. But in their absence, I found freedom. The freedom to live unnoticed, to slip into town dressed as a maid, to live as she pleased without the weight of royal expectations. She knocked on a familiar door and stepped inside. Norman, are you still asleep? She called. A groggy voice responded. Lucia, you're here already. Norman sat up, her hair messy, rubbing her eyes. Why did you drink so much last night? Lucia asked, handing her a cup of tea. Norman gave a sheepish grin. I write better when I drink. Lucia sighed and shook her head. You really should pace yourself. But I heard you published a new novel. Her tone brightened. Did you save a copy for me? Norman handed her a book. Of course. You helped a lot with its creation. Lucia hugged the book tightly. Finally, I've been waiting for this. You don't know how curious I've been. Norman chuckled lightly. You're exaggerating. I'm not, Lucia replied quickly. As a reader, I've been dying to know how it all turns out. She eagerly flipped through the pages, but her hands froze when she reached the end. Why are you skipping to the last page? Norman asked, amused. Lucia pressed the book against her chest. This is a treasure. I'll keep it safe forever. Norman's expression softened. You're only 18, but you act so grown up sometimes. It worries me. Moments like this remind me you're still young. Lucia's smile wavered slightly. Her thoughts darkened as the nightmare returned to her mind. Young, but not for much longer, she thought. She recalled the haunting vision, her 19th birthday, the heavy chains, the cold carriage, and Count Metten's calculating gaze. No matter how much I try, I can't change what's to come, she thought. But for now, at least, I still have the chance to make a difference in the time that remains. The future loomed over Lucia like an unstoppable force. Even though I've been having visions of what's to come since I was 12, I still can't seem to change anything, she thought, bitterly. Her mind wandered to the past, to moments where her dreams predicted disasters she was powerless to prevent. When she was 13, the mansion was flooded. At 14, an unrelenting winter left her household shivering from a lack of firewood. She had seen it all in her dreams, yet no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't alter the outcomes. Everything I've seen in those dreams has come true, as if my life is following a predetermined script. Her reality, while marginally better than the nightmares, still felt like a loop, endlessly repeating itself. When I turned 15, the constant dreams became unbearable. The headaches they brought were excruciating, like chains keeping me tethered to an unchangeable fate. The worst part? They always circled back to her fate. The death of the king when she turned 19 and her subsequent sale to Count Metten. Lucia wrestled with despair, knowing she couldn't escape the bigger, inevitable events. The realization left her bitter and deeply despondent. At her lowest, she even contemplated starving herself to escape it all. But then the grim thought of dying alone, forgotten in the vast palace, would make her retreat from such plans. I have to hold on, she whispered to herself. Yet the frustration never left. Lucia carried on with her daily routine, resigned to the belief that time would carry her body forward toward her destiny. It was a mundane existence, punctuated by brief moments of respite with her friend Norman. Norman was a budding romance novelist, and she owed much of her recent success to Lucia. Norman encouraged Lucia to open the last page of the book she had given her. Curious, Lucia flipped to the indicated page and was startled to find an envelope tucked inside. Inside was an astonishing amount of money. Norman, I can't accept this, Lucia exclaimed, shocked. But you must, Norman replied firmly. This is for your anniversary, the day you shared the ideas that turned my book into a bestseller. Norman explained that the money was a token of gratitude for the inspiration and insight Lucia had provided. The plot lines, characters, and themes in her novels, especially the romantic dynamics between nobles and commoners, had all been enriched by Lucia's unique perspective. Though initially hesitant, Lucia was touched by Norman's generosity. Their friendship had begun in simpler times. Back then, Norman struggled to captivate readers with her books, which featured commoner heroines. Publishers often pressured her to replace these characters with noble ones, insisting that only stories of grandeur would sell. Norman refused. Then Lucia stepped into her life. Using knowledge gleaned from both her dreams and real-world experiences, Lucia gave Norman an insider's understanding of social hierarchies, relationships, and the subtleties of noble life. With Lucia's input, Norman's book started to resonate with readers. In the early days, Norman barely made ends meet. Lucia had supported her, often bringing food from the palace. She never asked for repayment, but Norman, deeply grateful, promised to share her success if it ever came. And true to her word, Norman did. Now, as Norman pressed the envelope into Lucia's hands, her gratitude was evident. You've been like family to me, she said. Lucia's voice trembled. Meeting you was one of the best things in my life. Yet even as she accepted the money, a new worry gnawed at Lucia's mind. She had been planning to leave the palace, but the idea of running away now felt dangerous. The guards, bound by royal dignity, would undoubtedly pursue her. Worse, any connection to Norman might endanger her friend. Lucia reasoned that it might be wiser to wait until after her wedding to Count Metin to attempt an escape. Suddenly, a chilling memory from one of her dreams surfaced, leaving her uneasy. Norman noticed her pallor. Lucia, are you all right? She asked, concerned. Lucia deflected, pointing out that Norman looked more tired than she did. She encouraged Norman to rest, reassuring her that she was about to leave anyway. As she stepped outside, Lucia was struck by the bustling streets. The city was unusually lively. Curious, she asked Norman about the commotion. All the knights are in the capital for revision, Norman explained. Lucia realized this must be connected to the recent end of the war. The thought of witnessing a celebratory parade excited her. For a moment, she allowed herself to indulge in the energy of the crowd. As she navigated the throng, she accidentally bumped into someone. She apologized quickly, but found herself distracted by the scale of the festivities. This was something new, something she had never seen, even in her dreams. Then she heard a name ripple through the crowd. Taron! The cheers and murmurs grew louder. Taron, she repeated to herself. Was it the famed Black Lion of the battlefield? The possibility piqued her curiosity, drawing her toward the heart of the celebration. Duke Hugo Taron. Who is he? A man whose name alone commands reverence. The military commander, known for his unmatched physical prowess and brilliant strategic mind. He is the Black Lionel of the battlefield, a figure who leads his armies to victory without fail. The title of Duke, with its prestige and power, is just one part of what makes him extraordinary. In my dream, I learned of his marriage 2 years into my own unfortunate union with Count Mathon. The news of his wedding created a stir, as the marriage of a man so central to the kingdom's power dynamics couldn't go unnoticed. His bride, however, was far from what anyone expected. She was an unassuming young lady, bright, cheerful, but lacking noble lineage, wealth, or connections. The union defied logic. There was no political advantage, no dowry to speak of. Whispers spread throughout the court, with many concluding that Duke Taran must have been deeply in love. Yet, not long after, rumors painted a different picture. The Duke had chosen a wife precisely because she posed no threat to the influence and legacy of the Terran family. The Duke himself never addressed these rumors, which only fueled the belief that they were true. Norman's frustration filled the room as she threw her pen down in defeat. Nothing comes to mind. Why don't you have a cup of tea to clear your head? Lucia suggested gently. Norman, her face glum, sighed heavily. I'm done for. I've got nothing left. You're writing a romance novel, aren't you? Lucia asked. Yes, Norman replied, almost pouting. Lucia leaned in, her voice thoughtful. How about this? A story about a contract marriage. A contract marriage? Norman echoed, intrigued. Yes, two people who marry to fulfill each other's needs. No love involved, just mutual benefits, Lucia explained. Norman's eyes lit up. That's brilliant! You're a genius, Lucia! She grabbed Lucia in a bear hug. Norman, let me go, Lucia protested, but she couldn't help but smile. Norman's enthusiasm was infectious. She immediately began jotting down notes, and as Lucia watched her, an idea began to take root in her own mind. A contract marriage. Lucia murmured to herself, I know what he needs, a wife who can play the role of the lady of the Duke's household. Should I go for it? The thought was tantalizing. Could this be her chance to change her destiny? The idea burned brighter in her mind. But then, reality hit. How would she meet someone as powerful as Duke Terran? Even the king couldn't easily summon him. Then she remembered. The victory party. The celebration of their triumph in the war was starting tonight. He would surely be there. He was, after all, the man who brought them their victory. The atmosphere in Duke Terran's chambers was tense. Kwaise Hesse, the crown prince, lounged casually, his cheerful demeanor at odds with the Duke's icy silence. Isn't it too dreary in here? You should hang up a painting or something, Kwaise said with a grin. The Duke didn't reply, merely looking at him with a pointed expression. Come on, Dukey, don't be so cold, Kwaise teased. Terran's voice was low and clipped. I was planning on attending the party. You didn't need to come here to make sure I did. Fine. I believe you, Kwaise replied with mock innocence. I only came because I want to go to the party with you. Terran silently cursed him. Kwaise could be endlessly annoying. I'm only attending the first night, Terran stated firmly. All right, just one night then, Kwaise said, holding his hands up in mock surrender. You know, Duke Esther, you're harder to persuade than the ladies. Nobody likes a desperate man, Terran replied coolly. Kwaise's eyes widened. Wait, was that a joke? Did you just make a joke, Dukey? Terran's expression didn't change, but inside, he felt a flicker of irritation. At the victory party, Lucia found herself weaving through the crowded hall. Her eyes scanned the room, searching. La Duke Terran must be here somewhere, she thought. Then she saw him. Towering above the crowd, he was impossible to miss. His dark hair and sharp features made him stand out, even in a room filled with nobles. But as always, he was surrounded by people vying for his attention. It's going to be difficult to get to him, she thought, her nerves tingling. But she couldn't deny it. He was handsome. Too handsome. Why do I always have a weakness for good-looking men? She lamented internally. Her determination wavered for a moment. She had spent 4 days at these celebrations, watching and waiting, hoping for the right moment to approach him. Time was slipping through her fingers, and she couldn't afford to waste any more. This is my last chance, she thought resolutely. I have to talk to him tonight. 4 days earlier, at the start of the celebrations, Kwaise had been pestering the Duke once again. Now that you're here, isn't this nice? We haven't been able to party during the war, Kwaise said, grinning. The Duke gave no reply, his patience wearing thin. Look, Dukey, you promised you'd help me, Kwaise pressed. I promised to help you after you became king, Terran corrected him. Who else would become king but me? Kwaise retorted indignantly. Let's talk again after you are king, Terran replied, his tone dismissive. You're too mean, Kwaise pouted, sulking. The Duke ignored him, his thoughts wandering. Until he felt it. A gaze. His eyes swept the room until they landed on hers. Their eyes locked briefly before she turned away. Kwaise broke the silence, nudging Duke Terran. Are you even listening, Duke? What did you say? Terran replied, his attention clearly elsewhere. Kwaise frowned. You weren't paying attention again, were you? Terran didn't answer, his mind occupied. He couldn't shake the thought of her hesitant gaze. It wasn't the same as the countless stares he'd grown accustomed to. Hers felt different, curious, uncertain. She had seemed like she wanted to speak to him, yet she never did. Even after the party ended, she didn't approach him. Over the next few days, Taryn found himself attending again, each time wondering if this would be the moment she would finally come forward. But all she did was watch him from afar, her expression unreadable. When will she talk to me? He thought, his patience wearing thin. On the 5th day of the party, she grew restless. Time was slipping away, and she still hadn't figured out how to approach him. Watching from a distance, she saw the Duke excuse himself and leave. Her pulse quickened. This might be her chance to catch him alone. Without hesitation, she followed, careful to remain unseen. She found him outside, his stride confident and purposeful. Just as she was about to call out to him, a woman approached. "Hugo," the woman said softly. The protagonist froze, retreating into the shadows. She recognized the newcomer, Sophia Lorenz. She couldn't resist eavesdropping as the conversation unfolded between Duke Taryn and his ex-lover. "Hugo," Sophia said again, her voice trembling. "Lady Lawrence," Taryn replied coldly. "You no longer have the right to call me by that name." The protagonist shivered at the frost in his tone. "You are so cruel," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "How can you be so heartless? I believed we were in love once." "You were mistaken," Taryn said flatly. "I don't fall in love with anyone." Sophia flinched at his words. You don't mean that. You can't. We shared so much. Fall into bed, perhaps," he interrupted, his tone sharp. "But love? Never." The protagonist gasped silently, unable to believe the cruelty of his words. "What did I do to deserve this?" Sophia asked, her voice laced with anguish. "I gave you my heart. I thought you cared for me." "And I told you not to," Taryn replied. "You promised you wouldn't." Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she turned away. "You truly are heartless," she whispered, her faith in him shattered. As Sophia left, her sobs fading into the distance, the protagonist remained frozen in place, her heart pounding. "What did I just witness?" she whispered to herself. "This man? He's not who I thought he was." For the first time, doubt crept into her mind. Have I chosen the wrong person? Before she could retreat, his voice broke through the silence. "Why don't you just come out?" Taryn said, his tone carrying a mix of curiosity and amusement. "No more hiding like a cat to eavesdrop." Her breath caught, and she stepped forward reluctantly. I apologize, Your Excellency," she stammered, her cheeks burning. "I didn't mean to overhear." Taryn raised an eyebrow, his expression calm but watchful. "Aren't you standing a bit far for a conversation?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his voice. Realizing her mistake, she stepped closer, her footsteps hesitant. "Oh," she mumbled, feeling even more self-conscious. The Duke observed her closely, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "This woman, she's like a small animal," he thought, amused by her timid demeanor. "Well?" he prompted. "What is it you wanted to say?" She took a deep breath, summoning her courage. Her voice faltered under his piercing gaze. "Haven't you been staring at me for days because you had something to say?" Taryn interjected, his tone teasing but expectant. Her face grew warm with embarrassment. So he noticed, she thought, feeling exposed. "What is it you wanted to say?" he asked again, his patience evident. I would like to propose a contract with Your Excellency," she finally managed to say, her voice firm despite her nervousness. Taryn's interest piqued, and he leaned in slightly, his expression unreadable. "A contract?" he repeated. "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze with determination. "A life-changing contract." For a moment, he studied her silently, his curiosity growing. "Don't you think you need to introduce yourself first before making a proposal like that?" Lucia, undeterred, met his piercing gaze with steady determination. "I understand your caution," she began, "but revealing my identity and the details of the proposal here would be premature." The Duke nodded slightly, acknowledging her point. "Fair enough," he said, his composure intact despite the growing curiosity in his expression. "What is it that you seek then?" Lucia hesitated momentarily, gathering her thoughts. "Would it be permissible for me to visit your residence?" she asked, her voice carrying a trace of apprehension. Duke Hugo's eyes narrowed, though his tone remained calm. "Of course," he replied, carefully masking his frustration. "But when do you plan to come?" "I cannot wait indefinitely for this contract of yours," he added, his impatience seeping through his words. I'll be in touch soon, Lucia assured him, maintaining her resolve despite the tension between them. The Duke's expression darkened slightly, his faint grin fading into a scowl. So I'm supposed to wait indefinitely for your convenience? He retorted sharply. Lucia forced a confident smile, refusing to falter. It's a risk, she said firmly, Kadad, but one that's necessary for a life-changing contract. Hugo regarded her silently for a moment, taking note of her composure. I hope you deliver what you've promised, he said finally. His voice was calm, but the impatience beneath it was unmistakable. I am not always so patient, you see. I'll keep that in mind, Lucia replied evenly, masking her unease as best as she could. As Duke Hugo left, Lucia remained rooted in place, her thoughts swirling. His commanding demeanor and sharp words lingered in her mind, unsettling her. Later that evening, Lucia sat alone in her room, restless and consumed by worry. The memory of the Duke's icy conversation with Sophia Lawrence replayed in her mind, sending a chill down her spine. What should I do? She muttered to herself. Her earlier confidence now felt like a distant memory. She hadn't anticipated the Duke's ruthlessness, and his casual threat to obliterate anything that angered him weighed heavily on her. I told him I had a proposal, she thought, biting her lip. But how will he react when he learns it's about a contract marriage? Fear gripped her as she imagined his potential anger. Sleep eluded her as she continued to mull over her options, feeling both cornered and uncertain. What I need right now is... She trailed off, unable to finish her thought. The next day, Lucia found herself on the balcony, holding an umbrella against the pouring rain. The storm mirrored her inner turmoil, each drop falling like a reminder of her indecision. Lucia? A voice called softly. She turned to see Norman standing in the doorway, concern etched across her face. Come inside. It's pouring out here, Norman urged. It's fine, Lucia replied, her voice barely audible over the rain. I'll come in once it eases up. Norman sighed and stepped out, offering her a steaming cup of tea. Is something troubling you? She asked, her tone gentle. Lucia hesitated but eventually nodded. I have a decision to make, she admitted. One path is difficult and painful if left unchecked. The other, it's uncertain. A gamble, really. I don't know which is the right choice. What would you choose if it were you? She asked, turning to Norman for guidance. Norman's answer was immediate. The unknown path, of course. Lucia blinked, surprised by her certainty. You didn't even hesitate, she remarked. Norman shrugged. Life's only livable when it's unpredictable, she said simply. If you know exactly what's coming, where's the excitement? And if the other path is certain to bring pain, why not take a chance on the unknown? Lucia listened intently, holding her cup close to her face. Norman's words resonated deeply. Even if the choice leads to pain, Norman continued, it's your decision. No regrets. Regrets? Lucia echoed softly, her thoughts drifting. Exactly, Norman said with a smile. You only get one chance at life, so you might as well own your choices. Lucia couldn't help but laugh at Norman's cheerful tone. Thank you, Norman, she said, feeling a renewed sense of strength. The next morning, Lucia made her way to Duke Hugo's residence. Her steps were hesitant as she approached the large gates, which stood ajar. The absence of guards or servants was unsettling, and doubt began to creep in. Should I go in? She wondered aloud, debating her next move. Just as she reached for the gate, a booming voice broke through the silence. Who is it? Lucia froze as a shadow emerged from the house. Her heart raced as the figure drew closer, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing in her ears. As the man's face came into view, recognition dawned on her. A mix of fear and unease settled in her chest. Lucia hesitated for a moment as the towering guard scrutinized her. You don't look like a servant here. What are you doing here? He asked, his voice firm and suspicious. Are you a knight of this manor? She ventured, trying to steady her voice. The man's sharp gaze didn't falter. And if I am? He replied, his tone brimming with authority. Gathering her courage, Lucia asked, Is His Excellency home? The guard folded his arms. Maybe. Why are you looking for His Excellency? His piercing eyes and massive frame made her momentarily falter, but she quickly composed herself. I've heard of you, she began cautiously. Your name is Roy Croton, isn't it? You're Duke Hugo's loyal subordinate. Roy's expression shifted ever so slightly at her words, though he said nothing. You're more widely known as Mad Dog Croton than by your actual name, Lucia continued. A red-headed knight of infamy, she added, her voice gaining confidence now that she was sure of his identity. Roy raised an eyebrow but remained silent. I'm sorry for intruding so suddenly, she said, but if you could tell Duke Hugo that I'm here, the person who proposed a contract at the victory party, I believe he will agree to meet me. Roy's face remained impassive as he shook his head. I don't know about that, he replied firmly. I can't send a stranger in to meet the Duke. Who are you? Leaning slightly toward her, his sheer size made Lucia take a step back. She thought, he's enormous. You don't look like a noblewoman, Roy added, his tone skeptical. Are you a merchant? Despite his imposing presence, Lucia squared her shoulders. Despite my inadequate attire, she replied with steady resolve, but I am noble enough to meet with His Excellency. Roy smirked, an amused glint in his eye. Without another word, he turned and gestured for her to follow. In Duke Hugo's study, Roy entered casually, a grin on his face. My lord, he greeted in an almost playful tone. Hugo barely looked up before landing a sharp punch on Roy's face. I don't have time for you. Go play by yourself, the Duke said curtly. Roy groaned, rubbing his jaw. Humph, you always treat me like an immature child, he grumbled. Then, shifting to a more serious tone, he asked, Where's Jerome? Hugo replied disinterestedly, He went out. I heard why, but I forgot. Ignoring the dismissal, Roy leaned in. More importantly, you have a guest, he said. A guest? Hugo questioned, furrowing his brows. I don't recall having any appointments for the day. Roy's grin returned. She's not scheduled, but you'll want to meet her. Do you know her? Hugo asked, now intrigued. No, but she claims to be a noble. She doesn't look it, though, Roy replied with a shrug. No escort either. She's got guts, I'll give her that. Says she met you at the victory party and has something important to discuss. Realization dawned on Duke Hugo. It's her, he muttered, standing abruptly. Where did you put her? In the guest room, Roy said with a knowing smile. In the guest room, Lucia sat anxiously, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and her heart raced. She whispered to herself, I've come this far. There's no turning back now. The door opened abruptly, and Duke Hugo stepped in, his commanding presence immediately filling the room. You really came, he said, his sharp gaze locking onto her. Lucia stood, startled by his sudden entrance. Your Excellency, she began, her voice faltering for a moment. You knew I was in? Hugo asked, his tone unreadable. Lucia nodded quickly. I apologize for not informing you beforehand. It was improper, she said, bowing slightly. Hugo took a seat across from her, his piercing eyes never leaving hers. Let's not waste time. Speak, he ordered. Taking a deep breath, Lucia straightened her back. I am late in introducing myself. My name is Vivian Hesse, she began. The 16th Princess of His Royal Highness. I have come to ask for your hand in marriage. The room fell silent. Hugo stared at her, his expression unreadable as he processed her bold declaration. Lucia felt the weight of the silence pressing down on her. Her thoughts raced. Does he not believe me? Should I have dressed more formally? Is he angry? Finally, Hugo broke the silence. Princess, he said slowly, his voice steady but with a note of incredulity. Yes, Lucia affirmed quickly, her heart pounding. Hugo leaned back in his chair, a hint of curiosity flashing in his eyes. At the victory party, you mentioned a proposal, he said. That's correct, Lucia replied, mustering all her courage. I am proposing a life-changing contract. A marriage contract, to be precise. It's a mutual arrangement that will benefit both of us. I am prepared to outline the details if you are willing to listen. Hugo's sharp gaze lingered on her, and Lucia held her breath, waiting for his response. Duke Hugo regarded Lucia with a measured gaze, his patience thinning. So what is it? What benefit would I derive from marrying Her Royal Highness? Lucia hesitated before summoning her courage. Your Excellency, I understand you have a son you wish to designate as your heir, she began. The Duke's expression remained unreadable as he sipped his tea. Undeterred, Lucia pressed on. To pass on your title, the law requires you to marry. And you propose that marriage be with you? Hugo asked. Yes, she confirmed. Hugo leaned back, speaking calmly. And what of those who might exploit this knowledge for blackmail? Lucia's eyes widened. Blackmail? Your Excellency, I assure you, I have no such intentions. My proposal is purely practical. She continued, outlining her reasoning. As the 16th princess, my royal ties hold little influence, and I lack a maternal family, meaning fewer entanglements. The dowry I bring is modest, but my royal status lends the arrangement a certain dignity. Hugo seemed intrigued by her preparation, but grew stern when she added, I will not interfere in your personal life. You may conduct yourself as you see fit, and if you wish, we could pursue a divorce later. The Duke's expression darkened. Divorce is not an option for the Terran family, he said coldly. Lucia hesitated before offering her final point. Your Excellency, I am unable to bear children. This eliminates potential complications regarding your heir. Hugo studied her silently, his thoughts guarded. Your Highness? He asked eventually. Yes? Let us assess each point, he began. The Terrans are not concerned with dowries or noble lineage. As for your assumption about my private affairs, do you take me for a man of such character? Lucia flushed. That's not what I meant. Hugo interrupted, his tone sharp. And yet you suggest I cannot deny it. Whether I do or not is none of your concern. Their exchange grew tense, each trying to hold their ground. Lucia realized her arguments were failing to sway him and decided on a new approach. What of the matter of heirs? She asked cautiously. Does my inability to conceive not resolve that concern? Hugo frowned, troubled by her casual demeanor regarding such a significant matter. Can you prove your infertility? He asked. Lucia looked down, shaken by the question. No, Your Excellency. Then it cannot be considered, Hugo replied firmly. Desperation gripped Lucia as she searched for a solution. Suddenly a memory stirred, his cold warning not to give her heart to him. Clarity struck. She met his gaze with newfound resolve. Then how about this? She proposed. I vow never to fall in love with you, Your Excellency. Hugo blinked, momentarily caught off guard. What? Lucia's voice was steady. I promise never to fall in love with you. For the first time, the Duke faltered, her unexpected offer leaving him unsettled. Duke Hugo couldn't help but laugh. Lucia, puzzled, wondered if her words had been amusing, but it was his knowledge of laughter that amused him. That's my favorite condition of all. However, Hugo confessed, he couldn't see how such terms could favor her. A wife indifferent to her husband's affairs, a marriage hanging by a thread, how do these benefit you? He asked. Lucia took a moment, her silence heavy, before she shared her burden. I desire to lead a life of my own choosing. As the 16th princess, I'm easily overlooked, a pawn for the royal family's benefit, she confided in Duke Hugo. Her wish was simple, to have some say in her future, to avoid living with regret. Her expression turned somber, revealing the depth of her fatigue and sadness. The Duke was speechless. Lucia excused herself, rising to leave. Wait, Duke Hugo called out, stopping her. In a moment that took her by surprise, he kissed her and stared into her eyes, explaining it was a test of their compatibility. If we are to marry, we should at least be comfortable with each other, without being disgusted, he reasoned, before stepping away to arrange for her carriage, leaving her momentarily alone. In the solitude of the room, Lucia was overwhelmed by a whirl of emotions. Tears of relief and happiness welled in her eyes as she blushed from the kiss. As she slid down and sat on the floor, she realized she had overlooked an essential aspect of marriage: the physical and emotional connection between partners. In his study, Duke Hugo found himself unable to concentrate on his work, his thoughts preoccupied with the recent encounter. He understood the necessity of marrying to secure his lineage, yet the situation with the princess was complicated. He recalled her pledge not to fall in love with him and their moment when he kissed her that had left her blushing. A memory he found unexpectedly charming. Despite the complications, Hugo knew that as long as they both adhered to the agreed-upon conditions, there should be no issues. Deciding to address another matter, he rang a bell on his desk, summoning assistance. The door opened, and a man entered. You rang? Your Excellency? He inquired, ready for instructions. Duke Hugo spoke. Fabian, there's something I need you to look into, he began, setting the stage for his next move. In another scene, Norman asked Lucia, So, how did it go? What do you mean? Lucia inquired, puzzled by Norman's question as Norman gracefully poured tea for them both. Norman, looking thoughtful, gently prodded, The question you had about choosing between two paths, it was about your own situation, wasn't it? Sensing the delicacy of the topic, Lucia added, I'm guessing it's something you can't discuss with me. Regrettably, Lucia confirmed, No, I can't. I'm sorry, Norman. Norman nodded, understandingly. Everyone has their secrets. Some they might not even share with their closest friends or family, she acknowledged, trying to offer comfort with a warm smile. I just thought you were facing a difficult choice and wondered if there was any way I could be of help. Your advice was very helpful, Lucia admitted, her spirits lifted by the conversation. Because of it, I decided to take a chance. Norman expressed her happiness at being able to help. Now I'm just waiting to see what happens next, Lucia said, reflective yet hopeful. I see. I hope it turns out exactly as you wish. Please let me know the outcome, Norman requested earnestly. Of course, Lucia agreed, feeling grateful for Norman's support and friendship. As Lucia later strolled through the street, contemplating her recent decisions and their potential outcomes, she was shocked when she encountered Fabian, who approached her with a sense of purpose. As she thought, that man was definitely. Her thought was interrupted when he showed her a sealed letter in his hands. I am here to escort you, he informed her, indicating the importance of the message he carried, leaving her confused. At night, the young man strolled with a lantern in hand, halting upon encountering Fabian. What are you doing here at this hour, Fabian? The young man inquired, his curiosity evident. Fabian, dismounting from his horse, asked, Has His Excellency retired yet? Jerome, taken aback, informed Fabian that the Excellency was not present. Frustrated, Fabian muttered about the bad timing and declared his intention to take the next day off. Did he go for a light stroll? To where? Fabian asked, holding a sealed parcel that caught Jerome's attention. Why, what is it? Jerome asked. Jerome revealed that the Excellency had gone to see Countess Falcon, which angered Fabian. Quiet! Everyone is asleep, Jerome urged, trying to pacify Fabian, who had shouted in disbelief. But he is still seeing that woman? What were you doing? Fabian demanded. Jerome, resigned, replied, What can I do? It's none of my business who my master brings to bed. None of your business? That woman is cursed. She's killed her last 3 husbands, Fabian remarked. Jerome dismissed it as foolish talk, causing tension between them. Fabian asked, I thought Duke Hugo was involved with Baron Lorenz's daughter, referring to the gesture of sending yellow roses as a breakup symbol. Oh, His Excellency never did that before. He's been seeing her for over a year now. She has him wrapped around her finger, Fabian remarked, which frustrated Jerome. Jerome warned Fabian to be careful with his words, thinking, how does he still not know him? But Fabian, ignoring the warning, stormed off into the night, vowing to give his report to the Duke immediately. Despite Jerome's attempts to call him back, Fabian continued on his way, holding the sealed parcel. Stopping briefly, Fabian turned to Jerome, insisting he wasn't making things up. Duke Hugo had pressed him for the parcel several times, surprising Jerome. In a different scene, the woman asked, What do you think? As Duke Hugo sat on her bed perusing a document. Not bad, he responded casually. Impressed, she remarked, You're too hard to please. It took me 2 months to compile this, and it contains highly classified information from our side. Duke Hugo, maintaining his composure with a smile, stated, An investor must be level-headed. Trying to entice him to lie down, she rubbed her hand across his chest and asked, Then, you will invest, won't you? Their intimate moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Madame, I must speak with you urgently, came the voice of the intruder. Annoyed, the woman shouted at the intruder to leave. However, the maid persisted, informing her that there was a visitor with important matters for the guest. As she was speaking, the visitor interrupted her. It's Jerome, Your Grace. I'm sorry to bother you while you're resting. Fabian is waiting for His Grace at the manor with some matters of importance. He said His Grace has pressed him on the matter. So I've come to inform you and see what His Grace thinks is best to do. Jerome conveyed to Duke Hugo, who was in the room with the woman. The room fell silent. Okay, wait there. I'll be right out, Duke Hugo instructed, surprising the woman. Where are my clothes? He asked her. In disbelief, she questioned if he was leaving. As he dressed, the woman hugged him from behind and mentioned she would be away from the house for about 10 days. Duke Hugo responded with a slight smirk. I see. He rode away in his chariot into the darkness while the woman watched from her window, expressing her desire awkwardly. Back in his study, Duke Hugo questioned Fabian. Is this all of it? Having reviewed Lucia's files. Fabian, apologizing, explained the thorough examination had taken longer due to the limited records. Observing the files, Duke Hugo acknowledged Fabian's competence in his job. So, she is indeed a princess, Duke Hugo thought as he looked at Lucia's picture. The gathered information revealed that Lucia was raised as a commoner, brought to the palace at age 12, had never left the palace, and only ventured out once a week in disguise. Despite not making her societal debut, she appeared at the party with ease, which intrigued Duke Hugo. Not drawing much attention at the party, Lucia didn't seem out of place either, Duke Hugo noted. Amused, he mentioned her ability to write her own permission letters to leave the palace without raising suspicion. The palace guards are pretty lax, Duke Hugo added with a laugh. Fabian reported that she had been identified as a handmaiden. I have searched thoroughly but found no ties to any factions, Fabian informed the Duke. The Duke speculated that Lucia might have gathered information about Damien, his son, from a novelist familiar with socialite gossip. Seeking clarity, Duke Hugo asked, "So the only confirmed fact is that she is a princess?" Feeling he hadn't done his best, Fabian stood dejected. Duke Hugo, growing serious, deduced, "She leaves the palace on the same day every week, so the next day she'll leave must be tomorrow." He instructed, "Tomorrow, bring her to me. I shall go fetch her, Your Excellency," Fabian said with a bow. "All right," replied the Duke, dismissing his official. Alone, Duke Hugo began reflecting on his proposal for marriage. "I wasn't planning on rushing into it. I'll consider it like a coin toss. Heads if she comes back in the carriage, tails if she doesn't. Heads, I marry her, tails I don't," he thought. "Marriage is no big deal," he muttered to himself. "I am here to escort you," Fabian told Princess Lucia. Speechless, she struggled to find the right words. "You mean, right now?" she asked. "His Excellency would like to speak to you about your proposal," Fabian explained. "If you refuse, I'll leave in return," he added. For a moment, the princess considered her options. She noticed the carriage sent to pick her had no windows and no markings indicating it belonged to the Terrans. "It's so thorough, it's almost scary," she thought, clenching her fist. After a brief pause, she made up her mind. "I will go with you," she told Fabian, her expression determined. "This way," he said, leading her to the carriage. A knock came at the door, and Fabian entered Duke Hugo's study. He bowed, saying, "I have brought her here." "Is she alone?" Duke Hugo asked. "Yes," Fabian replied. "Did she come without resisting?" the Duke inquired. "Yes," Fabian answered. Smirking to himself, the Duke thought that the princess was interesting. She had no fear of what might happen. In the meeting room, Lucia picked up a cookie and tasted it. "This is absolutely delicious. Is it homemade?" she asked the steward, her eyes sparkling with delight. "Yes, it was made by the pâtissier of the Tarans," said the steward. "Wow, they are very talented," she commented. "Who is this lady?" The man thought he had never seen someone so relaxed at the Duke's mansion before. "I'm glad you like it," he told her. Though Lucia was nervous, she couldn't help but think that being the Duchess would have its perks, like drinking amazing tea and eating cookies every day. The steward then announced the presence of His Excellency, the Duke. This startled Lucia, and she choked on the cookie she had just eaten. "Arr! No! My mouth is full of cookies," she thought, clutching her mouth. "Leave us," Duke Hugo instructed the steward before sitting down across from the princess. "I have to greet him," Lucia thought, quickly trying to swallow the food. She chewed as fast as she could, trying not to choke, grabbing her tea in a hurry. "It's caught in my throat," she thought, as she gulped the tea. "This is more embarrassing because it's so quiet," she thought, finally swallowing. The Duke sighed, then dropped a parcel on the table and slid it over to her. Speechless, Lucia picked up the document and opened it, unsure of what to make of the papers inside. "My terms for our marriage. You must sign both papers," Duke Hugo told her. She read through the terms silently. Relinquishment of parental authority, agreement to admittance into the family registry. As she read, Duke Hugo observed her. "She is not ugly, nor exceptionally beautiful, same for her body," he thought, observing her amber-colored eyes. "Is this it?" Princess Lucia asked, after finishing the document. The Duke was taken aback. "What about the things I mentioned last time?" she asked. "There was nothing that could be put into writing," he replied. "Really? Then don't you need the freedom of a personal life? And may I become clingy and profess my love for you? She asked. Then why don't I add those too? Just not on paper, Duke Hugo said, already showing signs of frustration from her questions. Right, she said, holding up the pen, about to sign the papers. What are you doing? Duke Hugo shouted, standing up. Signing, Lucia replied, matter-of-factly. No, I have shown you my terms. Doesn't Her Royal Highness have terms of her own? He was shocked by her actions. May I add my own terms as well? The princess asked, surprising him even more. Of course, the contract cannot be favorable to only one party, Duke Hugo replied. Terms, she said softly, thinking. Thanks for watching this Manhwa recap. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss out on more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.